Ethan Carter stared at the two-story house in front of him.
Ow.
This would be his fifth foster home in just 3 years. At 12 years old, he had learned not to get his hopes up. Foster homes never lasted long for him. Mrs. Linda Baker, his social worker, squeezed his shoulder gently. "The Millers are good people, Ethan. I think you'll be happy here." Ethan nodded but said nothing. He had heard those words before. He clutched his small backpack tighter. Everything he owned was in that bag: some clothes, a worn-out book, and a small wooden music box. The music box was his most precious possession. Sister Lily had given it to him on his 8th birthday. Just weeks before they were separated in the foster system, Mrs. Baker rang the doorbell. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm the nervous flutter in his stomach. The door opened, and a woman with graying hair and kind eyes greeted them. This was Mary Miller. She wore a simple blue dress and a warm smile that made the corners of her eyes crinkle. "You must be Ethan," she said, her voice soft and welcoming. "We're so happy you're here." Behind her stood George Miller, a tall man with broad shoulders and a neatly trimmed beard. He nodded at Ethan with a smile that seemed genuine, if a bit reserved. Come in, Mrs. Miller said, stepping aside. "You must be tired from your journey." Ethan stepped into the house, his eyes taking in everything.
Ow.
The home was clean and tidy, with comfortable-looking furniture and family photos on the walls. It smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry. "Let me show you to your room, Mrs. Miller said after Mrs. Baker had gone through all the paperwork and left. "You must want to get settled." Ethan followed her up the stairs to a small but pleasant bedroom. There was a single bed with a blue quilt, a wooden desk by the window, and an empty bookshelf.
I wasn't sure what colors you liked, Mrs. Miller.
Explained, "But we can change things if you want. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. Why don't you unpack and rest a bit? Bathroom is right across the hall." When she left, Ethan sat on the bed and bounced slightly. It was softer than his last foster home's bed. He placed his backpack on the desk but didn't unpack. Experience had taught him it was better to stay ready to leave. After washing his face and hands in the bathroom, Ethan decided to explore the house a little. He walked quietly down the stairs, careful not to make noise. The Millers seemed nice, but he had learned that new foster parents often had rules they didn't mention right away. He could hear Mrs. Miller in the kitchen, pots and pans clanging as she prepared dinner. Mr. Miller was in what looked like a home office, typing on a computer. Ethan wandered into the living room and froze. There, in the corner by the large window, stood a beautiful upright piano. It was made of dark polished wood that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. The sight of it made his heart beat faster. Music had been Ethan's escape for as long as he could remember. His sister Lily, 4 years older than him, had loved music. She used to sing to him every night before bed, her voice sweet and clear. Sometimes she would take him to the community center, where she took piano lessons. And the kind teacher would let him watch. Occasionally, when no one else needed the piano, the teacher even let Ethan touch the keys, showing him simple melodies that he picked up surprisingly quickly. Without thinking, Ethan moved toward the piano. His fingers itched to touch the smooth keys, to see if he remembered the songs Lily had taught him. Just as his hand reached out, Mrs. Miller's voice came from behind him. "Oh, I see you found the piano." Ethan jumped back, pulling his hand away as if burned. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Mrs. Miller's expression was kind, but firm. "We don't touch the piano, dear. It's very old and precious to us. It belonged to someone very special." Ethan nodded quickly, his cheeks burning with shame. "I understand. I won't touch it." Mrs. Miller's face softened. "Thank you for understanding. Now, would you like to help me set the table for dinner?" Ethan followed her to the kitchen, adding, "Don't touch the piano," to his mental list of rules for this new home. Every foster home had its own set of rules, spoken and unspoken. Don't make noise. Don't ask for seconds at dinner. Don't leave your room after bedtime. Don't touch personal belongings. Now, don't touch the piano. Dinner was quiet, but not uncomfortable. The food was good chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Better than what he'd had at his last placement. Mr. and Mrs. Miller asked him gentle questions about school and what subjects he liked. "I like music class," Ethan said softly. then worried he'd said the wrong thing after the piano incident. But Mr. Miller just nodded. Music is important. Do you play any instruments at school? Ethan shook his head. I know, but I like singing. That's wonderful, Mrs. Miller said. Perhaps you can join the school choir when you start next week. After dinner, Ethan helped clear the table. Mrs. Miller showed him how they liked their dishes rinsed before going in the dishwasher. Mr. Miller asked if he'd like to watch TV with them, but Ethan politely declined, saying he was tired. Back in his room, Ethan finally unpacked his backpack. He placed the wooden music box on the nightstand beside his bed. Opening it carefully, he listened to the familiar tune that played. It wasn't a fancy music box, just a simple wooden cube that Lily had saved up to buy him. But the melody it played was the same lullaby she used to sing to him every night. Ethan closed his eyes, and in his mind, he could hear Lily's voice singing along to the tinkling notes. Sleep tight, little brother. I'll always be with you in the music. Tears stung his eyes. It had been 2 years since Lily died, a heart problem no one knew about until it was too late. By then, they had already been in separate foster homes. For a year, soft knock at his door made him quickly wipe his eyes and close the music box. Ethan? Mrs. Miller called gently. May I come in?
Yes.
Ma'am, he answered, sitting up straight on his bed. Mrs. Miller entered with a glass of water and a small plate with cookies. I thought you might like a little snack before bed. She placed them on his nightstand and noticed the music box. What a lovely box. My sister gave it to me, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Miller seemed to sense his sadness. Do you have a picture of your sister? Ethan shook his head. No, they didn't let me take much when they moved me the first time. Mrs. Miller's face showed a flicker of something pity, perhaps, or understanding. Well, if you need anything during the night, our room is at the end of the hall. After she left, Ethan changed into his pajamas and climbed into bed. He opened the music box again, letting the melody play as he stared at the ceiling. Quiet house? He could almost pretend Lily was there, singing him to sleep. Tomorrow would be another day of trying to fit in, of being careful not to break rules, of being the perfect foster child, so maybe, just maybe, he could stay in one place long enough to feel at home as he drifted off to sleep. Ethan's fingers moved slightly on the blanket, playing invisible piano. Keys to the melody from his music box, the last song his sister had sung to him before she passed away. The first week at the Miller house passed quietly for Ethan. Each morning, he made his bed perfectly, just as he had been taught in his previous foster homes. He kept his few belongings neatly arranged and was careful to follow all the rules, especially the one about not touching the piano. But that didn't stop him from looking at it. Sometimes, when the Millers weren't in the room, Ethan would stand near the piano and imagine what it would feel like to play it. His fingers would twitch at his sides, remembering the few lessons his sister Lily had given him at the community center years ago. On Monday morning, Ethan started at his new school. Mrs. Miller walked him to the office and helped him get his class schedule. I'll pick you up at 3 o'clock right here, she said, pointing to the front entrance. Have a good first day, Ethan. Ethan nodded and watched her leave before turning to face his new school. The hallways were crowded with kids talking and laughing. No one paid any attention to him as he made his way to his first class. Being the new kid wasn't new to Ethan. He knew the drill. Keep quiet, don't draw attention, and try to blend in. His first few classes went by without any problems, but the teachers introduced him to the class, and he sat in the back, taking notes and speaking only when called on. At lunch, he sat alone at the end of a table, eating the sandwich Mrs. Miller had packed for him. He was used to being alone. Sometimes it was easier that way. Hey, you're new, right? Yeah. A boy with red hair and freckles sat down across from him. I'm Pete. Ethan, he replied softly. You're staying with the Millers, aren't you? Mrs. Miller from church. Ethan nodded, taking another bite of his sandwich. They're nice, Pete continued. Mr. Miller coaches Little League in the summer. Do you play baseball? Ethan shook his head. Never tried it. Come to the park with me and my friends sometime. We play pickup games on Saturdays. Before Ethan could respond, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Pete waved goodbye and disappeared into the crowd of students. Ethan's last class of the day was music. As he entered the classroom, his heart beat a little faster. The room was filled with different instrument skitters hanging on the wall, a drum set in the corner, and best of all, a piano at the front of the room. The music teacher. Brown hair and bright eyes, she greeted Ethan warmly and pointed him to an empty seat. Today we're going to learn about rhythm, Ms. Clark announced to the class. When Ms. Clark started a simple pattern, Ethan found himself easily keeping up. As the patterns got more complex, many students struggled, but Ethan followed without difficulty. It felt natural to him, like speaking a language he hadn't used in a long time, but hadn't forgotten Ms. Clark noticed. After class, she asked him to stay for a moment. You have a good sense of rhythm, Ethan. Have you played music before? Ethan looked down at his shoes. Not really. My sister used to teach me a little, but that was a long time ago. Well, you have a natural talent. We have music club after. School on Wednesdays, if you're interested. Ethan thought about it. He would have to ask the Millers, and he wasn't sure if they would let him stay after school. I'll think about it, he said. When Mrs. Miller picked him up, she asked about his day. Ethan told her about his classes and mentioned Pete's invitation to play baseball. Pete Johnson is a nice boy. From a good family? And what about your other classes? Do you like your teachers? Ethan hesitated before mentioning music class. Ms. Clark said, There's a music club on Wednesdays after school. Mrs. Miller was quiet for a moment. Would you like to join? Ethan nodded, surprised she didn't immediately say no. I'll talk to Mr. Miller about it, she promised. That evening at dinner, Mrs. Miller brought up the music club. Ethan's music teacher thinks he has talent, she told her husband. There's an after-school club on Wednesdays. Mr. Miller looked at Ethan thoughtfully. Do you want to join this club? Yes, sir, Ethan said quietly. If it's okay with you. Mr. Miller nodded slowly. Education is important. That includes music education. If you keep up with your other studies, I don't see why not. Ethan couldn't believe his luck. Thank you, he said, a small smile appearing on his face. After dinner, while the Millers watched TV in the living room, Ethan sat on the couch near the piano. He was careful not to touch it, but he couldn't stop looking at it. It was so beautiful, with its polished wood and ivory keys. He wondered what it would sound like. As the week went on, Ethan settled into a routine. School, homework, chores, dinner with the Millers. Each day became a little easier. Ethan sat with them at lunch. On Wednesday, Ethan stayed after school for music club. There were about 15 other students, and Miss Clark divided them into groups based on what instruments they wanted to play. When she asked Ethan, he hesitated. I don't know, he admitted. Why don't you try the keyboard today? I can show you some basics. She led him to an electronic keyboard and showed him how to turn it on. Do you know the names of the keys? She asked. To Ethan's surprise, he did remember. This is C, he said, pointing to a white key in the middle. And this is D, E, F, G, A, B, and then C again. Miss Clark looked impressed. Very good. Your sister taught you well. She showed him a simple song, placing his fingers on the right keys. As Ethan began to play, something stirred inside him. His fingers seemed to know what to do, moving from one key to the next, almost on their own. The melody was different from Lily's song, but the feeling was the same, a warm, comforting feeling that made him forget for just a moment all the sadness and loneliness of the past few years. When the club ended, Miss Clark gave him a sheet of paper with the song written on it. "Practice at home if you can," she said. Ethan folded the paper carefully and put it in his backpack. He didn't have a piano or keyboard at home, at least. Not one he was allowed to touch, but he could practice in his mind, his fingers moving through the air as he remembered the notes that night. After finishing his homework, Ethan sat on his bed and opened his music box. As the familiar melody played, he moved his fingers in the air, pretending he was playing along on a piano. He closed his eyes and could almost hear Lily's voice singing with the music. "I wish you were here," he whispered to the empty room. "Would know what to do." The next day after school, Mrs. Miller had to run errands, so Mr. Miller picked Ethan up. On the drive home, Mr. Miller asked about music club. Miller nodded. Music can be very powerful, connects people across time and space. They were quiet for a moment. Then Mr. Miller asked, "This sister of yours who taught you music, what was her name?" "Lily," Ethan said softly. "Her name was Lily, and she passed away." Ethan nodded, looking out the window. 2 years ago. Heart problem. Mr. Miller sighed deeply. "I'm sorry, son. Losing someone you love is never easy." When they got home, Mr. Miller unlocked the door and then checked his watch. "I need to make a work call. You be okay by yourself for a bit?" Mrs. Miller should be home soon. "Yes, sir," Ethan said. He was used to being alone, as Mr. Miller disappeared into his office. Ethan stood in the living room, his eyes drawn once again to the piano. With no one around, he dared to move closer than he ever had before, close enough to see his reflection in the polished wood, close enough to feel the cool air around the keys. His fingers itched to touch them, to bring the beautiful instrument to life with music. Lily's song was so clear in his mind. He could almost hear it floating in the air around him. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped back. He had promised not to touch the piano, and he would keep that promise. But someday, he hoped the Millers might change their minds. Someday he might be able to play Lily's song on a real piano again. Until then, he would keep practicing in his mind, keeping the music in Lily's memory alive in his heart. 2 weeks passed, and Ethan found himself settling into life with the Millers. School was going well. He made decent grades, kept to himself most of the time, but sat with Pete and his friends at lunch. Music class quickly became his favorite. Part of the day, every Wednesday, Ethan stayed for a music club. Ms. Clark always made time to work with him on the keyboard. She seemed impressed by how quickly he learned. "You're a natural, Ethan," she told him one day after he played a simple melody perfectly on his first try. "Most students take weeks to learn what you pick up in minutes." Ethan felt his cheeks grow, warm at the praise. He wasn't used to being good at anything. But when he played music, everything made sense in a way nothing else did. At home, Ethan was careful to follow all the rules. He did his chores without being asked, finished his homework on time, and never touched the piano. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. Sometimes, when he was alone in the living room, he would sit on the couch and just look at the instrument, imagining what it would be like to play Lily's song on those beautiful keys. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Mrs. Miller asked Ethan to help her clean out the attic. The space was dusty and filled with boxes, old furniture, and forgotten treasures. "We've been meaning to organize this space for years," Mrs. Miller said as they climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, "but we never seem to find the time." Ethan followed her into the dimly lit room. It smelled of old books and mothballs. Mrs. Miller turned on a small lamp, casting long shadows across the floor. "Let's start by sorting these boxes," she said, pointing to a stack in the corner. "Christmas decorations go there, photo albums there, and anything else we'll decide as we go." They worked quietly for a while, with Mrs. Miller occasionally telling stories about the items they found. An old vase that had belonged to her grandmother, a baseball glove Mr. Miller had used in college, a collection of seashells from there. Honeymoon, as Ethan moved a heavy box labeled winter clothes, something caught his eye. Behind where the box had been was a small, dusty wooden chest. It was about the size of a shoebox, with metal hinges and a simple latch. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to the chest. Mrs. Miller looked over and went very still. "Oh," she said softly. "I didn't realize that was up here." belonged to someone very special to us. Ethan watched as she carefully opened the latch and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a small, delicate music box. It looked old but well-loved. Mrs. Miller lifted it gently from the chest. "This was Grace's," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grace?" Ethan asked. Mrs. Miller looked at him with sad eyes. "Our daughter? She passed away 5 years ago." Ethan felt a cold shock run through him. The Millers had had a daughter? No one had told him that. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. Knowing all too well what it felt like to lose someone you loved, Mrs. Miller gave him a small smile. "Thank you, dear." She looked down at the music box in her hands. Grace loved music. She was a beautiful pianist. She wound a small key on the bottom of the music box and opened the lid. A sweet tinkling melody filled the dusty attic. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The song was different from his music box, but there was something familiar about it, something that reminded him of Lily's song. He closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him. When the song ended, Mrs. Miller carefully closed the music box. "The piano downstairs was Grace's," she said softly. "She loved that piano more than anything, played it every day." Suddenly, the rule about not touching the piano made sense to Ethan. It wasn't just an old, valuable instrument, it was a memory of their daughter, a piece of her that they wanted to keep safe. "She sounds nice," Ethan said. "Your daughter." Mrs. Miller nodded, carefully placing the music box back in the chest. "She was. She worked with children, you know, teaching music to kids who otherwise wouldn't have the chance to learn." Ethan helped Mrs. Miller finish organizing the attic, but his mind kept returning to the music box and its melody. That night, as he lay in bed listening to his own music, box play Lily's song. Couldn't help but wonder about Grace Miller and the piano downstairs that no one was allowed to touch. The next day was Sunday, and the Millers went to church. Ethan went with them, sitting quietly in the pew and listening to the hymns. The church had a beautiful organ, and Ethan found himself watching the organist's fingers as they moved across the keys. After church, they had lunch with Pete's family at a local restaurant. The adults talked, while the kids sat at their own table. Pete told jokes that made Ethan laugh, and for a brief moment, he felt like a normal kid having lunch with friends. Back at the house, Mr. Miller asked Ethan if he wanted to watch a baseball game on TV. Ethan agreed, and they sat in the living room together. Mrs. Miller brought them popcorn and joined them, knitting a scarf as she watched. During a commercial break, Mr. Miller looked over at Ethan. "So how's that music club going? Miss Clark still thinks you're a natural?" Ethan nodded. "She's teaching me a new song. It's harder than the others, but I like it." Mr. Miller seemed to be thinking about something. "You know, I was never musical myself. But Grace," he paused, glancing at the piano. "Our daughter could play anything she heard. Just like that. First time, perfect." Mrs. Miller's knitting needles stopped moving for a moment, then continued more slowly. "Mrs. Miller showed me her music box yesterday," Ethan said carefully. "In the attic." Mr. Miller nodded. Grace had a collection of them. Loved the sounds they made. He cleared his throat. The one in the attic was her favorite, though. The game came back on, and they fell silent. But Ethan could feel something had shifted in the room. The Millers had opened up to him just a little about their daughter. It felt important, like a door had been cracked open. That Wednesday at music club, Ms. Clark showed Ethan a new piece of music. "This one's a bit more challenging," she said, "but I think you're ready for it." Ethan looked at the sheet music. The song was called Moonlight Lullaby. As Ms. Clark played it for him, Ethan felt a strange sensation. The melody was different, but there was something about it that reminded him of both Lily's song and the tune from Grace's music box. "What's wrong?" Ms. Clark asked, noticing his expression. "Nothing," Ethan said quickly. "It's just ... the song reminds me of something." Ms. Clark smiled. "Music has a way of connecting to our memories. That's what makes it so powerful." After club, as Ethan waited for Mrs. Miller to pick him up, he hummed the new song to himself. His fingers tapped against his leg, playing invisible keys. When Mrs. Miller arrived, she seemed distracted. "Sorry I'm late," she said, as Ethan got in the car. "I had to stop by the store." On the drive home, she asked, "Learn anything new today?" "Ms. Clark taught me a song called Moonlight Lullaby," Ethan replied. Mrs. Miller's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Did she now? Later, he heard Mrs. Miller on the phone, her voice too low to make out the words. At dinner, both the Millers were quiet, exchanging looks Ethan couldn't understand. That night, Ethan had a dream about Lily. She was sitting at a piano, the Millers' piano, playing her song. But when Ethan got closer, he realized it wasn't Lily at all, but a young woman he didn't recognize, with the same kind eyes as Mrs. Miller. He woke up with tears on his cheeks and the melody of Lily's song echoing in his head. But now, somehow it was mixed with the tune from Grace's music box and the new song Ms. Clark had taught him. Three different melodies that seemed to belong together, like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Ethan reached for his music box and opened it, letting Lily's song fill the dark room. As he listened, he felt a strange certainty growing inside him. There was a connection between these songs, between his sister and the Miller's daughter. He didn't understand it yet, but somehow he knew it was important. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ask Ms. Clark about Moonlight Lullaby and where it came from. Maybe then he would begin to understand why these three melodies haunted his dreams, and why the piano downstairs called to him so strongly. The next day at school, Ethan could hardly focus on his classes. His mind kept returning to the three melodies that seemed connected. Lily's song. Student through the door, Ms. Clark was arranging sheet music on her desk. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "You're early today, Ethan. Eager to practice?" Ethan nodded and then took a deep breath. "About that song you taught me yesterday? Moonlight Lullaby." "Of course," she said, putting down her papers. "What would you like to know? Where did it come from? Who wrote it?" Ms. Clark looked surprised by his question. "Well, it's an interesting story, actually. It was written by a former music therapist who worked in this area. She composed it for children in the foster care system." Ethan felt his heart beat faster. A music therapist? What was her name? "Grace Miller," Ms. Clark said. "I never met her myself, but her work with music therapy was well known in our district." Ethan's mind was racing. Could that explain why the songs seemed connected? "Did she work at a place called Sunshine Community Center?" Ethan asked, remembering the name of the center where Lily used to take piano lessons, Miss. Clark thought for a moment. Why do you ask?" "My sister used to take piano lessons there," Ethan said quietly, "before she died." "Ethan, are you saying your sister might have known Grace Miller?" "I think so. The song my sister used to sing to me, It sounds a little like Moonlight Lullaby, and I'm living with the Millers now. They told me not to touch their piano because it belonged to their daughter." Miss Clark sat down, looking thoughtful. "Have you told the Millers about this?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. I just figured it out myself. This could be very meaningful to them, Ethan. Perhaps you should talk to them about it." Before Ethan could respond, other students began filing into the classroom. Miss Clark gave him a gentle smile. "We'll talk more at music club, okay?" Throughout the class, Ethan could hardly concentrate. His mind was filled with memories of Lily singing to him, mixed with the image of Grace Miller working with foster children at the community center. Had Grace taught Lily the song? Had Lily changed it and made it her own? The pieces were starting to fit together, but the full picture wasn't clear yet. After school, Ethan decided to skip music club. He needed to talk to the Millers. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said, his voice more serious than she had ever heard it. Mrs. Miller gave him a concerned look, but nodded. "All right, let's go home and talk." Ethan's thoughts were jumbled as he tried to figure out how to explain what he had discovered. When they arrived, Mrs. Miller called to her husband. "George, could you come to the living room? Ethan has something he wants to tell us." The three of them sat down, Ethan on the couch, facing the Millers. The piano stood silently in the corner, watching over them. "What is it, son?" Mr. Miller asked, his face concerned. "Is everything okay at school?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I think my sister Lily knew your daughter Grace." The Millers exchanged shocked glances. "What makes you think that?" Mrs. Miller asked softly. My sister used to take piano lessons at Sunshine Community Center, Ethan explained. Was in foster care too, like me. Miss Clark told me today that Grace wrote a song called Moonlight, lullaby for foster kids, and she worked at that same center. Mrs. Miller's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my goodness. The song Lily used to sing to me. Ethan hesitated, then added, and the music box in the attic, Grace's favorite one. It plays something similar too. Mr. Miller leaned forward, his eyes intense. Ethan, what was your sister's full name? Lily Carter. Shh. She was 4 years older than me. Mrs. Miller stood up suddenly and left the room. Mr. Miller and Ethan sat in awkward silence until she returned a few minutes later, carrying a photo album. She sat down and began flipping through the pages. Is this your sister? There was Lily, her familiar smile beaming at him. From the page, she was sitting at a piano, possibly the very same one in the room with them now. That's her, Ethan whispered, his finger gently touching Lily's face in the photo. That's Lily. Mrs. Miller's eyes filled with tears. Grace had a special student she talked about often. A girl with exceptional talent and a beautiful voice. We might have recordings of your sister playing. Hardly believe what he was hearing. Recordings of Lily? He had nothing of her except memories in the small music box. The thought of hearing her voice again made his heart ache with longing.
Can I hear them?
He asked. Mr. Miller nodded. I'll look for them tomorrow. They're stored in the basement somewhere. They talked for hours that evening. Every night with what he now knew was a version of Grace's Moonlight lullaby. Grace would be so happy to know her music lived on through your sister, Mrs. Miller said, wiping away tears, and that it comforted you after Lily was gone. He opened his music box and listened to Lily's song with new understanding. Binding them together through music and memory, the next day was Saturday. Mr. Miller spent the morning in the basement, searching through old boxes. Ethan helped Mrs. Miller with chores, both of them quiet, lost in their own thoughts. After lunch, Mr. Miller emerged from the basement, dust in his hair but triumph on his face. I found them, he announced, holding up a small box of flash drives. Grace's recordings, they gathered in the living room. Mr. Miller connected one of the drives to the TV and navigated through folders of files. Here, he said, selecting one labeled Lily C. Final Performance. The screen flickered, and then Ethan saw his sister. She was sitting at the Miller's piano, her long hair pulled back in a ponytail. Grace stood beside her, a hand on her shoulder, speaking words they couldn't hear because the video had no sound. Then Lily began to play. The melody filled the room, Moonlight lullaby, but with the small changes that made it uniquely Lily's song. And then she began to sing, her clear voice bringing tears to Ethan's eyes. Sleep tight, little brother. The moon is watching over you. Close your eyes, little brother. I'll always be with you. ... Double quotes. Ethan couldn't hold back his tears. Were crying too, watching their daughter on screen, live and doing what she loved. When the video ended, the room was silent except for quiet sniffles. Mrs. Miller was the first to speak. It's almost as if they brought us together, she said softly. Mr. Miller nodded, then turned to Ethan, looked at him in surprise. You mean? Yes, Mr. Miller said. I think Grace would want you to play it. Would you play for us, Ethan? Would you play Lily's song on Grace's piano? Ethan felt a mixture of emotions, joy, fear, sadness, hope. He looked at the piano, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. This house of silence now, with the Miller's blessing, he would finally have that chance. He would play for Lily and for Grace. He would play for all of them. Slowly, Ethan stood up and walked toward the piano, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Ethan stood in front of the piano, his heart beating fast in his chest. For weeks, he had dreamed of this moment, imagining what it would feel like to touch the keys of this beautiful instrument. Now that the moment had arrived, he felt both, excited and afraid. What if he couldn't remember how to play? What if he disappointed the Millers? What if he couldn't do justice to Lily's song, his cue Grace's song? He felt a gentle hand on his shoulder and looked up to see Mrs. Miller smiling at him through her tears. It's okay to be nervous, she said softly. Take your time. Ethan nodded and slowly sat down on the piano bench. The polished wood was cool beneath him. He lifted the cover to reveal the keys, white and black, waiting patiently for someone. To bring them to life again, he placed his hands on the keys, feeling their smooth surface under his fingertips. Then he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He could see her face in the video they had just watched, sitting at this very piano, and he could feel the connection between them all himself. Lily, Grace, and the Millers tied together by music and memory. Ethan began to play. The first notes were hesitant, his fingers remembering a skill they hadn't used in years. As the melody began to take shape, his confidence grew. The song flowed from his memory through his fingers and into the room. Lily's song, Grace's song. Now his song too. He didn't have Lily's beautiful voice, but he hummed softly as he played, the familiar tune wrapping around him like a warm blanket. The piano responded to his touch, his voice clear and strong after years of silence. As he played, Ethan felt something inside him begin to heal. Each note seemed to stitch together the torn pieces of his heart. For the first time since Lily died, he felt truly connected to her. Not just through memories or the tiny music box, but through the living, breathing music they both loved. When the last notes faded away, the room was silent. Ethan opened his eyes to see both Mr. and Mrs. Miller crying openly. But they were smiling, too, through their tears. "That was beautiful, Ethan," Mrs. Miller said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Absolutely beautiful." Mr. Miller nodded, too, moved to speak. After a moment, he cleared his throat and said, "I think Grace and Lily would both be very proud." Ethan felt tears on his own cheeks but didn't wipe them away. These weren't tears of sadness or loneliness. They were tears of connection, of finding something he thought was lost forever. "Can I play it again?" Ethan turned back to the piano. This time, he played with more confidence, letting the music flow freely. He remembered more of the nuances Lily had added to Grace's original melody, the little flourishes that made it uniquely hers as he played. He felt as if Lily was there with him, guiding his fingers. And maybe Grace was there too, smiling at the way her music had lived on and brought comfort to a lonely boy who had lost his sister. When he finished the second time, Mr. Miller sat down beside him on the bench. "You know," he said quietly, "we have all of Grace's sheet music. She wrote many songs for her students. If you're interested, they're yours to learn." Ethan looked up at him, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Really?" Mrs. Miller joined them, sitting on Ethan's other side. "The piano has been silent for too long," she said, echoing her husband's earlier words. "I think it's time for music to fill this house again." That evening, the three of them ate dinner together, but it felt different from all the previous meals they had shared. The wall of grief that had separated them was beginning to crumble. They talked about Grace and Lily, sharing stories and memories, finding comfort in their shared experiences of love and loss. After dinner, Mr. Miller brought out a box of Grace's sheet music. "These are all the songs she wrote," he explained, spreading the papers on the coffee table. Some were published, but many were just for her students. Ethan looked through the music, recognizing the style from Moonlight Lullaby. Each piece had a title and a dedication, names of children Grace had worked with, and then he found a sheet titled Moonlight Lullaby for Lily C. Her voice brings it to life in ways I never imagined. She says she sings it to her little brother every night. Ethan's hands trembled as he held the paper. Here was proof of the connection between Lily and Grace, written in Grace's own hand. "May I keep this?" he asked softly. Mrs. Miller nodded. "Of course it belongs to you." That night, as Ethan got ready for bed, he felt different. The ache of missing Lily was still there. But alongside it was a new feeling, a sense of belonging, of being connected to something larger than himself. He placed Grace's sheet music on his nightstand, from two remarkable women who had shaped his life through music. The next morning was Sunday. After breakfast, Ethan asked if he could play the piano again. The Millers happily agreed, and he spent an hour practicing Moonlight Lullaby, using Grace's sheet music to learn the original version. When Mrs. Baker, his social worker, came for her monthly visit that afternoon, she was surprised by the change in Ethan. He was more talkative, more animated than she had ever seen him. He's doing very well here, Mrs. Miller told her, as they watched Ethan show Mr. Miller something on the piano. I can see that, Mrs. Baker said, smiling. I've never seen him so happy. After Mrs. Baker left, the Millers asked Ethan to join them. In the living room, they sat together on the couch, looking somewhat nervous. Ethan, Mr. Miller began, we've been talking, and we wanted to ask you something important. Ethan nodded, suddenly feeling nervous himself. We know you've been in several foster homes, Mrs. Miller continued, and we understand if you're not ready for anything permanent yet, but we want you to know that we would like you to stay with us for as long as you want. Ethan looked at them in surprise. You mean ... not just as a foster kid? Mr. Miller smiled. We were thinking more along the lines of adoption. That's something you might want someday. Ethan felt a rush of emotions. Joy, disbelief, hope, and a little fear. You want to adopt me? We do, Mrs. Miller said, reaching for his hand. We've lost a daughter, and you've lost a sister. We can't replace them, and we wouldn't want to. Try. But we can be a family together, helping each other heal. Grace brought you to us, Mr. Miller added. Through Lily and through music, it feels right, like this is meant to be. Ethan thought about all the foster homes he had lived in, all the times he had packed his small backpack and moved on. He thought about how, for the first time since losing Lily, he felt safe and understood. Millers knew his pain because they had felt it too. They valued what he valued, music, memories, and the people they had loved and lost. I'd like that, he said finally, to stay here, to be part of your family. Mrs. Miller pulled him into a hug, and Mr. Miller placed a hand on his shoulder. The three of them sat together, connected by shared grief, but also by new hope. Later that evening, Ethan sat at the piano again. The Millers were in the kitchen preparing a special dessert to celebrate their decision to become a family, as the last rays of sunlight streamed through the window. Catching the dust motes in golden light, Ethan began to play Moonlight Lullaby. Once more, but this time he sang along softly, using the words Lily had always sung to him. Sleep tight, little brother. The moon is watching over you. Close your eyes, little brother. I'll always be with you. As he sang, he felt at peace. Lily was still with him, in the music and in his heart. Now he had found a new home, with people who understood the power of music to heal, to connect, and to keep alive the memory of those we love. The foster boy who was told not to touch the piano had found his voice and his place in the world. Through Grace's piano and Lily's song, three broken hearts had found a way to beat together, creating a new kind of harmony, a family bound by music, memory, and love.